overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?
Well, welcome to What the Franklin here on the Really American Media Network Empire. I'm Chip Franklin. Good to have you here. Malcolm Nance is due to join me in just a couple minutes, and we'll talk to him about a lot of stuff. He was the part of a New York Times article about men and women who aren't in the military who went to Ukraine to help the Ukrainian citizens and their army and against, obviously, Putin's Russia. I'm not going to say Russia because I grew up in the DC area and I knew a lot of Russian people growing up after the Cold War, before the Cold War, and during the Cold War. And there's it's kind of like what Bill Maher says about states like Alabama, and I'm at the top of that list of people that mock Alabama and some of these other red states. But the truth is, if you look at the presidential election and that's how you're going to decide whether the state is blue or red. Alabama was, I want to say, was 52%, 53 maybe for Trump and 47 for Biden. And when you look at that and you say to yourself, that means 47% of that state. I don't know how many people live there. Let's just for fun say 8 million people live in Alabama, although that's a probably high number. Then you're saying a ridiculously high number of 5.5 million people of that population are blue. And so, it's difficult. And I traveled a lot around this country, working at colleges as a musician and a comedian. And I saw a lot of it, but it was before Trump where everything really changed. It's interesting to see and to listen to the charges against Trump out of Manhattan. And I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends, my wife and others that think that it was a mistake to have this be the first charge. I don't know. I don't know if you saw this the other day that Kemp, who the governor of Georgia, is now going to back legislation that would allow the legislature to throw out district attorneys, like the ones putting this case against Trump. The good news about that famous call, that infamous call that Trump made to the Secretary of State, that was that it's also a federal crime. So, that could be possibly, they'll let them have that first stab at it, but it could be something that Merrick Garland, the Justice Department, look at. Again, moving forward, obviously the other charges that stem from January the 6th, let's put the documents aside, even though that is still a strong case. If you go back and you remember some of the stuff that happened on January the 6th, a little look back here real quick.
Right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Please welcome the 45th President of the United States of America.
Trump is president, Christ is king. Trump is president, Christ is king.
Let's have trial by combat.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
USA! USA! USA!
The funny thing about that, and it goes on and on and on, I just wanted to put that in there just to talk just briefly about Mike Pence and what a strange character he is. The fact that he is the closest thing to a Christian out of this whole group. In other words, he goes to church every Sunday, but he still is afraid of Trump, and he still is frightened by the prospect of having to deal with some 70 million people that voted for him. I will say this, though, that I have seen in quite a bit around the United States in my travels, and also just, my next door neighbor who voted for Trump in 16 and 20. But when he saw what happened, whoa, now he mocks it. He's come all the way back. He never was a socially conservative person. I don't know that much about what he really feels and where it really comes from, but it's pretty amazing. We're waiting for, I just talked to Malcolm. He'll be with us in just a second. So we'll talk to Malcolm Nance. He has a book out that looks like it's going to be made into a film. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If you don't know a lot about Malcolm, he's a former Naval Intelligence officer, one of the first real black spies that we had, and also, an NBC correspondent and an author. And we'll talk about his latest book, which came out last year, but still pretty amazing. It's interesting. There's a guy that attacked him, and I'll wait till Malcolm gets here before I actually bring it up. But there is, by the way, just a couple things. There are other people from my old KGO days that are doing podcasts. I do this twice a week. I do it on Tuesday and Thursday, and I do it on this Really American Network on YouTube. So please, if you are on YouTube now and you have not liked YouTube and subscribed for the Really American, you can please subscribe there. And while you're at my site, do it as well. And part of that is, I think, is because the more subscribers we get, the more people are notified about what we're doing here. One of the things that I do a lot of is these videos. And this is a video that I did today. And I just want to show you about the killing in Nashville. And I found this video of Lindsey Graham, which I found incredible. It's about 60 seconds. Catch us.
The 28-year-old shooter killed 6 people. We now average a mass shooting a day and a school shooting a week. And what do the Republicans say? Stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody. The GOP is a killing machine, protecting guns over your children's lives.
An effective tool for keeping kids safe is armed law enforcement.
You think a 55-year-old retired cop playing Crazy Birds on his phone is ready for this? Republicans talk tough.
I own an AR-15.
What the hell did you just say?
Bullshit. When you think of Lindsey Graham, do you think this or this? Lindsey is GOP tough, which is weak, flabby white boys with assault weapons, egging on their Call of Duty adolescents. You don't think inside those dark closets are angry boys with something to prove? Meanwhile, the gun lobby keeps writing checks and the GOP keeps cashing them. An AR-15 is a military weapon that practically anyone can own. The Republican Party is a spineless NRA puppet, who too is yours for the price.
Fucking A. Damn right. It's nice.
You're in a lot of trouble, Donnie.
Subscribe on YouTube. It's Really American. Anyway, I do one of those a day, so they're everywhere if you want to find them. We and on Twitter, on my Twitter account, and also on Really American. Really American is a political action group that, unlike others, has teeny little administrative cost. Nobody's getting rich off it. And Really American, because of people like the actual site, and Brooklyn Dad and T-Pain, all good friends of mine, we made a big impact in the both in the 2020 and 2022, but especially in the 2020, getting Ossoff and Warnock, getting people to the polls. We raised close to $250,000, if I'm not mistaken, simply for cab rides to get people through Uber and Lyft to go to the polls. And actually, it was more than that. It was like 400,000. Nonetheless, it was exciting, and it was great to see. The other thing, that video about guns, and to listen to Republicans, again, that same NRA-backed mantra of that, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, it's true. People do kill people, but they kill them with guns, and they're now killing them with AR-15s. We are averaging a mass shooting every day, but even more disturbing in some ways, a school shooting every week. And, I don't know if you've seen the video. You saw it in there momentarily ago about when he blew through those doors it was a woman, when she blew through those doors with the gun. And now I've already seen what I knew I would see, which is the right wanting to pin this on trans people. I made another mistake with Malcolm. Give me just one more second here. Again, Malcolm Nance, this is not his fault. This is all my fault, getting the right information out to these guys. MWNANCE. All right. Appreciate your patience here. Anyway, so this coming Thursday, we have Frank Figluzzi on the show, former assistant director of the FBI. And then next week, I'm scheduled to have Billy Baldwin. And then later on in that week, possibly, well, at least I'm tentatively scheduled to have Adam Schiff on. So please stay tuned with us. I do it twice a week, and I'll be doing it at 5 o'clock Eastern time and 2 o'clock Pacific time. Let me, okay, it's coming, Malcolm. It's on its way. Yeah, this is like, I did radio for 27 years, and there are always moments like this, and it's not a technical moment. It was simply just, I'm like Malcolm. I have like 9 or 10 email addresses. I don't know how many you have, but what I did is I take all these email addresses and I funnel them to one account, which is my chip at chipfranklin.com, which you are more than welcome to email me through that. And let me go through a couple messages here while we wait for Malcolm to come in. First of all, okay, good. A lot of nice. Here you go. No, Lee, you have not missed anything. I have been tap dancing here, waiting for Malcolm to come in. We had a bit of a screw up here, but he'll be with us in just a second. We do have, let me just talk about this one guy here. There's one guy on here. His name is Gervais, and he's attacking Malcolm, saying he is, well, I've known Malcolm a while. I've interviewed him, I don't know, 20 times, and I've read his books. Malcolm, so I don't embarrass him right now since he's not here yet. He went to Ukraine. He went there to assist in fighting the Russians. If you're old enough to remember the Republican Party in the 80s and after the 80s and up until recently, they stood up to Russian dictators and oligarchs. One of the things you got to remember, too, the reason why Trump and other Republicans and even people like Tucker Carlson have been loath to actually to support Ukraine. If you go back to the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was one person, particularly in Washington, who wanted to support incredibly, wanted a strong support for Ukraine, but he couldn't get it. The president at the time was Bill Clinton, and the guy that wanted support for Ukraine because he knew the people there, and this is long before Hunter Biden got involved, was Joe Biden. Joe Biden fought, to get support for this struggling former Soviet bloc country was trying to get independence, and he did. All through that period of time, we saw, again, the Republican Party still back these fledgling democracies and stand up to the Soviet Union, which at the time then became Russia after the breakup. But one of the things you got to really understand is, and so in Ukraine, there was a dictator, a guy, his name, I'm going to butcher it, Yovanovitch, I believe. Anyway, Vukovic, somebody's trying to help me. But Manafort was working for him, and he was trying to get him and Putin some lobbying efforts in Washington. But what happened was the people in Ukraine overthrew the dictator, and he had to go back to Russia to his friend Putin. And Manafort came to the United States. And he came to the United States, and he still wanted to influence government. So he offered to Donald Trump to run his campaign for free. And he did that. And he did run it for free. And he also got Putin. Putin had Manafort's ear. And in the 2016 primary and leading up to the 2016 election, the Republican Party dropped officially off their platform support for Ukraine. Why? There were talk about missiles and about being able to defend themselves, but the bottom line was they've been fighting now for 7 years since the election, and the Republican Party has turned their backs on these men and women fighting over there, and instead embraced Vladimir Putin, who, as we know, kills political rivals and. Come on. All right. Well, I'm still having a hard time here with this, folks. I do apologize. Let me try this one more time and see if I can I know Malcolm's trying to get in, and we're just having a difficult time. So this is all on me, and I appreciate your patience very much. This is why I get paid the big money. Let me get this in here right now. This is funny. I don't really miss taking callers, mostly because I get callers like this Gervais idiot who's on this stream right now. But I do miss talking to a lot of you guys, and I do appreciate your time and hanging out here and everybody saying hello to each other. All right. Anyway, so A couple things that are happening right now in Ukraine, and just in a minute we'll talk to Malcolm about this. But the Russian government is in bad shape. Most of the people in the country don't support this war because they see no end and they really see no advantage. I don't know if you saw the people in Georgia standing up to their government, who in essence wanted to come in and remove essentially all their rights. And they went to the streets. Hundreds of thousands of them went to the streets in Georgia. And this is a weird sort of coincidence. They went to the streets and they said, no, we're not going to have this happen. And hundreds of thousands of them got the president and the legislature to back off and to assure that they would keep their rights. Meanwhile, in the United States, in Georgia, the state, the governor has, again, I mentioned this earlier, the governor has again come out and said that he will back a legislative call to remove prosecutors if they don't like what they're doing. And currently right now, prosecutors are deciding whether or not to bring indictments. It seems like they will. In fact, they may be waiting for the indictment in New York to happen before they do it. Again, once that happens, once it gets into the Georgia courts, I'm not sure Kemp can do anything other than possibly pardon Trump when he gets out. And that might be it. That might be exactly where he's going. So I see Malcolm, I see you kind of there, but I don't know if you're with me. Malcolm, are you there? Oh, he got disconnected. We're close. We're really close. It is funny. I was talking to this about recently, just about the people that have blocked me off Twitter, and almost all of them. I mean, I'm really flattered that people like Sebastian Gorka or Ted Cruz would block me on Twitter. But more to the point is that, I guess more to the point of this is that we live in this bizarre, strange world now with social media dictates so much of who we are and how we act. Oh, come on, Malcolm. What's going on here, bud? Okay. Yeah, Dan, I apologize, everybody. Let me just do this. Let me play this again for you while we're waiting for. Oh, we finally got him. And that was, let me welcome to our show here. This is Malcolm Nance. If you don't know Malcolm, Malcolm was a former Naval Intelligence officer, one of the first black spies our country ever really had, and possibly I don't know how many. I don't want you to tell me if there are more. I guess we probably should do that. And also a
here we go.
Correspondent. We're getting to it, and the author of some just amazing books. The latest that is the one that most people probably aware, but there are quite a few, as you see here. The plot to hack America, betray America, the plot to destroy democracy, and his latest, which will scare the shit out of you. They want to kill Americans. Nice enough to spend time with me. How you doing, buddy? I like the smile.
I'm fine. I'm just trying to set up my camera here because
your camera looks great.
Doing another podcast, and
there you go.
I'm going to move over for you. There you go. I think I'm centered now.
Good to have you here.
All right. Glad to be here.
So let's talk briefly about the Republican Party and Ukraine. I was just leading up to this a minute ago, going back to 2016 when the Republicans pulled support of Ukraine off their platform under the guidance of Manafort, who had just left. And Yanukovych, who was the dictator in Ukraine that he worked for?
Yeah, Yanukovych.
Yeah. Yours again?
Yanukovych.
Yanukovych. Yeah. So anyway, I was telling people this. I remember when that happened, and I was at that in Cleveland. I was at that convention while it was going down, and I had some friends that correspondents, a couple from Europe, that said this shows you the Republican Party has officially now embraced Vladimir Putin. And of course, at that time, that summer, the internet, the IRA, which is a group in I forget what city in Russia, they were doing their hacking.
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg. They were doing tremendous damage and continue to do so and continue to plan to do so moving forward. Are you, by the way, you're such a great writer. Are you a fan of David Ignatius?
Yes, of course.
Have you read The Palladian?
No, I didn't.
It's brand new. You would love it because it's exactly about what's going on right now, but in the private sector, people that might leave major powers to go work on their own to try to control markets and all. But you were just recently in the New York Times on what I thought was a cheap shot. But for people that don't know, you went to Ukraine to assist in the volunteer effort to fight the Russian army, and you and your partners in democracy have done a kick-ass job, a wonderful job, and to the point we've seen Putin. Again, it seems to me almost desperate. We don't know if he's sick. We don't know what his political backing is there. We don't know if somebody's going to take him out. But tell me a little bit about your time over there. Why did you go, and who did you meet? What was the environment? What was the environment like there?
Well, before I went to Ukraine about a month before the invasion, and I went there to do a study of the Russian order of battle. That's what kind of units they were using, where they would be located. And more importantly, I needed to see from the ground the avenues of invasion. And this would be the major highways, byways, little back roads, places from very close to where Russian forces were corralled. And they could only move in one certain direction. Like, for example, in Belarus, north of Chernobyl, nuclear power plant reserve, which is a highly radioactive area, you could only come down one road, one sort of two-car, old wrecked tarmac road, which leads into the Chernobyl nuclear preserve, which is highly radioactive. And then you would have to seize the reactor, bypass it, and continue on down into the city of Irpin. And then we had these other small roads that were in the forest, and then major highways, like we're coming from like Russia city of Belgorod in the northeast, and you would have to come through the city of Sumy and then all the way down to Kyiv. When you study these pathways, you understand how fast an enemy force can move, what kind of logistics that they can expect to seize along the way. Ukraine has a very highly established network of gas stations, which are fabulous, right? They're sort of like a cross between 7-Eleven, the best gas station you've ever seen, and the best liquor store that you've ever seen, full of, Western European goods, French cheeses, Italian wines, Armenian brandies, things like that. And as
Brian, to interrupt you, Malcolm, Brian Karen was telling me when he was in downtown Kyiv, it would remind him of Bethesda, Maryland. It was amazing.
Oh, no, it's nicer than Bethesda. What is he
my
talking
home,
about? He's got to get out of there. I mean, he clearly has not been around, any major capitals. The first time I felt Kyiv, the first thought I had was that it was Munich without the gas market, right? Without the victualler market in downtown Kyiv. I mean, it wasn't as classic, but it was clean and neat and had everything. Greatest coffee society on this planet. Blew Australia off my coffee society list. Many, many very, very wealthy people in the city. The city was clean. The city was beautiful. The old, what I thought would be drab Soviet apartment blocks had been painted, updated, modernized. And I kept thinking, am I in Eastern Europe? Well, we have these misperceptions that Eastern Europe is the Soviet Union of the 1960s.
Well, I bring this up because, I was, before you came on, I was talking about what a fan of helping Ukraine Biden was in the 90s, to a point where Clinton had to, stop it, leave me alone. It was like he was constantly saying, we have to help these, these companies, these countries that came out of the bloc, of the USSR. And what, was it, what got their growth going? What changed Ukraine from this country that was a part of this bloc of the Soviet Union to this burgeoning democratic republic?
Well, I was quite surprised because in my studies going over to Ukraine, I understood that Ukraine was supposedly the second lowest gross domestic income of all of Europe, second only to Albania. Well, I've been to Albania. Okay. Albania is a trailer park on the Adriatic. No, I'm just joking, my Albanian brothers and sisters. It's beautiful.
But it's not Ukraine.
It's not Ukraine, but the previous Sosa regime had turned that place into a communist paradise of pillboxes and broken dumped refrigerators on the side of the road. But Ukraine was nothing like that. I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking, if they're on credit, then they are on credit with the greatest credit management I've ever seen. I've seen more Teslas in downtown Kyiv than I thought I saw in West Hollywood.
Yeah. I'm really impressed. I don't know him. I never met him. Only seen him speak on television, but I'm very impressed with Zelensky and the fact that he had so many opportunities to leave, to come to the United States, make millions of dollars, probably write a book, do the whole drill, right? But he's chosen, the famous line is, I don't want an airplane, send us weapons,
Why would he leave?
Well, I mean, because he could be a dead man, he's number one on their list of people to kill, Russia, obviously. And, obviously because I think, I think we underestimated him, and we misunderstood who he is. We thought he was this comedian, this entertainer. But unlike the one we had for 4 years, who was, came from the same background, this guy had some substance, a lot more than we ever really thought.
If you go on Amazon, I think it's on Prime, you can watch the TV show Servant of the People with translations on it. First off, very funny show. Yeah. It's a very funny show, but it's about Zelensky, about how he actually became president, an accidental guy, a comedian who becomes president. And my favorite part is they actually go through Yanukovych's actual house of excess, like all ebony staircases and Murano glass, chandeliers that cost $1 million each. And he's going through and he's got his paper bag lunch that his dad made for him. And he's sitting at this like enormous giant table and he takes out his paper bag lunch. I'm sorry, that's Zelensky. He didn't have to act for that show. He truly wanted to be a servant of the people. Here's something people need to know about Ukraine. The reason that he didn't take that ride, I had figured out very early on in my investigations in Ukraine. I was invited to go to the Donbass. I went to the forward edge of the battle area against the Russian forces and their occupation troops down in Avdiivka, which even to this day, I cannot imagine how Avdiivka has managed to survive the Russian invasion. They still hold it. But we went there with the commander of the Ukrainian Army and the commander of the Joint Task Force down there, General Pavlyuk, who is now in command of the Ukrainian Army, and General Syrskyi, who is still in charge of parts of the Ukrainian Army and may become the next Minister of Defense. So these two guys, after seeing them in action in the cold, talking to the journalists, we got 210 feet from a Russian position before they opened fire, knowing journalists were over there trying to entertain us, I guess. And one thing that I realized right away, these two generals cannot be beat. The way they talked, the way they briefed, the way they expressed confidence that if Russia comes, they're getting their ass kicked. And I said this on air. I said, I believe about 6 days before the invasion, I was on an MSNBC program, and there was all these naysayer doom and gloomers, Kiev will fall, and 72-hour guys. And I said, well, wait, lived in Kiev for the last month. Kiev is never falling. It's never falling. It's 5 million people. It's the physical size of Chicago, right? If an artillery piece hits in the northwest of Chicago and I'm in the south of Chicago and there's a fire in the northwest, I'm never going to know about it. A lot of the fighting was like that. You wouldn't know. You would hear it way off in the distance. That city was huge and the population was ready to fight when the invasion came. But 6 days before the invasion, I went on television. I said, I think you're underestimating something. There's something that is completely left out of the U.S. news media analysis. And that's the Ukrainian army. 250,000 men and women with weapons that had already broken out their war stocks. And interestingly enough, Chip, I was looking for this. In the 4 days leading up to Z-Day, I saw not one Ukrainian army truck move in the daytime. Is this similar, though, to what the Mujahideen did in Afghanistan? No. What you're looking at... in spirit. In spirit, no. This is an order of magnitude different. You are looking at the Maquis of France in an army, okay? This is not the Pétainist army. This is not the Vichy army. This is... I really am trying to get which army has had this much guts. And our fighting is very much like the Ardennes Forest in 1944. They're doing this
without surface-to-air missiles, pretty much, right? They don't have.
They have surface-to-air missiles. They have surface. They actually, I got to tell you something. I've been to the brigade level air defense. I've seen how the air defense is integrated all across Ukraine. They don't use these old Soviet radar systems, right, with the big bulbs. They had integrated this into, flat screen TVs showing all the, the air defense rings, which unit would be able to pick up if a missile went through. This is why the Russians have fired thousands of air-to-surface missiles and surface-to-surface missiles, and they just don't make it to their target. They've got a kill rate of somewhere around 70%. The new missiles that the
wow,
Russians,
that's high. That's really high.
Very high. But the new missiles that they sent to defend Kyiv, the National Surface-to-Air Missile System, NASAMS, which is a current U.S. air defense missile that's used on ships. The Norwegians sent them a version of it. It's got a 100% kill ratio now, and they fired a couple of hundred of them. If it flies, that thing's going to kill it.
They use the heat signature to track them? Or?
No, radar, active radar homing.
Oh, so they can change it while it's actually chasing it.
Yeah, it's the AIM-120 Sparrow missile, that we have on our fighter aircraft.
So
a
couple things about this I want to get to, and I do want to talk to you about the Times article, because I know that you're pissed and you should be. But let me ask you this. So if in 2024 a Republican president is elected, and we don't get the House back, I say we being the sane human beings in this country, and they follow through on their talk of pulling support, is it possible for them to continue fighting? And the second part of that is how much longer can Putin take internal heat, not just from the people, but the oligarchs who have billions of dollars in other banks that don't want this shit going down?
Yeah, this is where I need to plug my Substack. You need to go to malcolmnance.substack.com. I wrote an article about 6 weeks ago called How Putin Will Die. And it's very clear this is a professional intelligence analysis. It will not be America, will not be CIA assassins or Ukrainian, hit teams. It's going to be another Russian, whether it's a guy who lost his Ukrainian grandmother who puts a pencil through his eye, or some cleaner, or more than likely, it's going to be another person who has declared himself warlord, like Prigozhin, right? Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's cook, the commander of PMC Wagner, is having major clashes with the commanders of the Russian ground forces. And Russian ground forces started cutting them off of ammunition. Like, screw you. We don't care what you're doing. We are going to take enough ammo for us to survive, because the Russian forces are not on the offensive. PMC Wagner is on the offensive, and the Ukrainians are using the exact same rope-a-dope, what we call head-on-anvil strategy, where the Ukrainians create a hard point that the Russians want. They allow the Russians to smash their heads against it, lose several thousand soldiers, hundreds of tanks. When the pressure becomes too much and the Ukrainians take too many casualties, they pull that, they let the Russians have it, and the Russians go, oh, we took a village. Well, the Ukrainians say, yeah, we're going to get that back. And then they attack from another direction and break the entire line. That's happened twice now. So,
well, you'd think that they would have learned what we learned in Vietnam, what they learned in Afghanistan. It's hard to move an indigenous population without literally killing every single one of them.
Well, this is not, again, this is more like World War II. Get those insurgency ideas out of your head.
Okay.
This is two full grand armies hitting face to face. But I'll tell you one thing, and this thing that you had mentioned about the Republicans, if they take power, the reason that Ukraine exists today is because Vladimir Zelensky resisted the extortion attempt of Donald Trump. And Joe Biden became president, and the $450 million of U.S. Javelin missiles got released to the Ukrainians. That one allocation was so critical to the start of this war. Russian tanks were blowing up everywhere. I went through Javelin school. Everybody I was part of a special operations group that belonged to the Defense Intelligence Agency over there, and everyone wanted to be a Javelin gunner. And our teams, we had high priority, so we were all trained in Javelin, every individual in our squad, and Law, the British anti-tank missile system, and Stinger surface-to-air missile system. So if someone got wounded, you could just pick it up and take it. But javelins, everyone wanted the javelins. They were killing things with the javelins.
Were they similar to Tomahawks? Or
I'm sorry.
Put them in some perspective. We can understand because I've been hearing about Javelin missiles now for 5-6 years. Why did they make such a difference?
The Javelin missile is a very interesting piece of advanced technology. It has two components. It has the missile launch tube, and then it has a thing called the CLU, the Control Command Launch Unit. The Command Launch Unit looks through a very sensitive thermal imaging sensor, and you put it on your shoulder, or you kneel down, and when you start looking through it, you first acquire the tank at 2, 3, 4 kilometers. It locks onto it. Then it transmits what it sees to the missile seeker. Then the missile seeker sends back the image the missile sees of that Russian tank, right? No matter what happens, once you press the launch key, that missile flies and it will go to that target. And it will go one of two ways. It'll fly over it, explode, send a molten lava ball down into it at its weakest armor, set it off, the tank explodes and the turret flies in the air. Or direct attack where it comes into the side where there's heavy armor. We try not to do that most of the time. That thing was murderizing tanks. That's the only word to use. They were slaughtering them. And the Russian offensives into Kyiv from the northwest and the northeast just ground to a halt. But another thing the Ukrainians were doing was they were destroying every fuel truck they saw. They had partisans out at night, special forces out at night. They knew that the Russian army would come to a grinding halt if you destroyed their fuel. So that's how they beat 2 full armies and destroyed almost 70,000 Russian men and almost 2,000 Russian tanks.
Yeah. I've always thought that the word tactical nuclear was oxymoronic because once you start going down that road, no one can tell where it's going to end. Yeah. We've never had the use of tactical nuclear weapons in combat in this world. And I don't think we will. And not because Putin would be loath to use them, but I believe that the military doesn't want it over there either. I mean, the people that live there, they know where that could go, but you roll your eyes. You think we could see tactical nukes?
Full disclosure. Wrote an article about this too. Go to the Substack and read it. And also I wrote an article about why I joined the Ukrainian Army. Last August, just before we did the Kharkiv counteroffensive, the largest defeat of Russian forces since World War II, we got issued out chemical biological gas masks. And they were brand new, American standard, full mask with 2 spare canisters for you out there. And we were given these heavy Soviet rubber ponchos, which were actually perfect for a chemical biological warfare environment and creating a shelter. But that's when we realized if we're successful in this mission, the Russians are going to hit us with chemical weapons. If we break their line, we have to assume that they're going to get so desperate they may nuke something. But there's nothing out there with a concentration of forces that a nuke could really hurt. It doesn't destroy the entire Ukrainian army. It just destroys 10, 15, 20 kilometers. And that's not going to make a hole for your forces to come through because it will be a giant hole.
Not to mention radioactive.
Oh, they don't care about radioactive. When they went to Chernobyl, they did not care. And also, when the Chernobyl power plant blew up, the radioactivity went to Russia, mainly. Some went into Western Europe, went to Russia.
Prevailing winds go east to west. You're right, yeah.
As if he knew that radioactivity would go to Russia and he could anger the Russian population. But I don't see how or where they could use it. Now, if they use it, I know what will happen the next day, right? NATO will declare a no-fly zone. They will push hard into Ukraine. They will start destroying surface-to-air missiles with anti-radiation missiles, and they will declare that NATO forces are coming in the largest humanitarian rescue operation since Hiroshima. It will have to happen. No one's going to let that country get nuked. Now, we were very afraid that they would nuke Kyiv or another city like, like Venezia.
What's the end game there, Malcolm? I mean,
I don't know. Putin's madman theory.
Yeah, I don't think he's insane. I don't think he's. He might
There
be
is-
sick and desperate.
But there might be a possibility that if we see an actual nuke, and this is what I wrote in my article about how Putin dies, it could be that, let's say, Prigozhin or Kadyrov gets some rogue generals to go along with them and takes over a couple of strategic rocket or Air Force bases and acquires nukes from their nuclear bunkers. And then he nukes Kursk, where the Russian nuclear command post is located, on the day that Putin is there. Then suddenly you have a nation state that breaks apart where nukes are being used internally. That's a higher possibility than them nuking Kyiv.
Yeah, I don't mean to freak people out, but I guess you could also nuke Poland too while you're at it, right?
Well, what would they do? I mean, that would be the end of Russia. Russia has no army. 80% of their army is in Ukraine, and it's being devastated. I mean, they've pretty much got border scouts and or Girl Scouts selling cookies on the Russian border. The Poles would invade immediately. NATO Article 5 would go into effect immediately. By the way, U.S. forces are now permanently stationed in Poland, which means U.S. service members would die. Everything we have in Europe would go rolling into Russia immediately. Operation Reforger would start bringing U.S. Army divisions to Europe, and within 3 months, we'd be in Moscow.
Yeah, but within 3 months, they have submarines with nuclear warheads.
Yeah, but the question is, do they have command of those submarines? Do they have control of those submarines? Putin has been threatening,
like a bad '80s movie, Malcolm. I mean,
I know it's an '80s movie.
Yeah.
It's by Dawn's early light. But the point is, these guys may lose control of their nation state.
Well, that's what we don't want, obviously.
No, we don't want that. We don't want that.
We don't want. How many nuclear missiles do they have? Any clue?
4,000, I believe.
Okay. And that goes back to SALT, right? The counting and that sort of stuff. Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you this. How does our government view people such as yourselves going over there to help them? Is there any official position?
Yeah, there is an official position. The official position is U.S. citizens should not go to Ukraine. That's the official position. They have I don't think they comment about U.S. citizens serving in foreign armed forces. It is not against the law for a U.S. citizen to serve in a foreign armed force. If that was the case, we would have had a very hard time in the American Revolution, since so many foreigners came to the United States and served in the U.S. Continental Army.
Lafayette being the most
notable. Baron von Steuben, Tadeusz Kościuszko. I mean, all of these people, really made America and stayed in America. But the same thing with Ukraine. We are allowed to go to Ukraine. We just cannot be recruited in the continental United States. So when you go there, you cross the border, they bring you to a base, you get assigned, you sign a contract, you become a contracted member of the Ukrainian Army.
How many Americans are over there right now?
Boatloads.
Like approximately 1,000?
I wouldn't know exactly. It's classified number. I know general roundabout number, how many people are in the Legion. I'm not going to tell you. But there are a lot more Europeans than there are Americans. There are a lot of Americans, a lot of Brits, a lot of French, Italians, surprising number of Czechs and Estonians. It is true. And my battalion, we had 12 Colombians who were just murderous. These guys were awesome soldiers.
How close did you get to Russian soldiers?
Let me see. Maybe 100 meters.
Wow.
When we were out there, some of the missions we had, we were not to make noise. Some of our missions were to make a lot of noise.
Have they captured Russians?
Yes, we've captured Russians. Absolutely. And we treat them in accordance with the Geneva Convention. One little trick that they did was to show me and speak to me in English. And I guess it was to trick them into believing I was CIA or something. But we'd feed them, we'd give them coffee and tea, and they were like, oh, these guys are pretty nice.
There are people writing, and you've seen it, that you are still active naval intelligence officer for the United States government. But the New York Times piece went after a lot of Americans that went over there. I mean, they didn't go after you like they did the others. They implied that you had a vendetta against one other person, and you were worried about where money was going, and how some people were using this as a profit machine, and which I would have no doubt that some might. They might go over there to come back and try to write a book or whatever they want to do. And it's up to them, obviously. There's no law against, being a corporate idiot. Right. But looking at, what the New York Times did, it bothered me that they kind of just missed the whole point. I've read different pieces about Americans being over there before, but my sense was it's just that they missed the whole point, that the article didn't really achieve anything.
I got to tell you, I'm going to be frank with you. This is the first time that I've discussed it. I've spoken to a hometown newspaper here in upstate New York, but not about this subject. And I'm really going to hold a lot of my fire for whatever action comes from that, because their title online was "Stolen Valor."
Yeah,
right. US,
that's not an easy accusation. That's a pretty strong accusation.
Yeah, but because they say the writers don't choose the title. They did use it quite a bit inside the article, but they couldn't come up with an instance that met the documented Stolen Valor Act of 2013.
Explain to people what that is, please.
Right. The Stolen Valor Act started in 2005. It was a little too broad, where they were saying you couldn't wear military uniforms, all that. Didn't survive the courts. They modified it in 2013 to say that, because the law says you can wear uniforms and be an idiot and all these other things, but you had to have used a certain category of medals and badges and obtain benefits from it. The common parlance is someone who just pretends to be a soldier somewhere. And the main character was a very troubled individual. I knew this guy. I knew he was troubled. I was acting as his senior NCO and giving him guidance in the 2 times that I met him in a year. He was drinking extensively. He was operating on the battlefield without a contract. We called those people freelancers. And there were hundreds of freelancers in the first 3 months of the war.
How do they get weapons? How do they get?
Well, first off, the Ukraine was invaded, and territorial defense units were set up, and these were ad hoc, like Spanish-American War militias, right? And a commander would come there. He'd have a couple of deputy commanders that were reservists, and every human male above the age of 18 was supposed to report into them and draw 1 rifle, 120 rounds of ammunition, and 4 magazines. And these freelancers would come in and say, "Hey, I've got U.S. Army experience. Let me help you." And these commanders weren't stupid. They needed people with experience. So they let them come in. They issued them a weapon. Contracts will come later. Well, contracts never came for a lot of guys. They would come, they would fight, they would spend a couple of months there or a month there, and they would leave the country having fought in Ukraine. The Legion is different. We are contracted members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. We are a battalion under a Ukrainian Armed Force brigade, and we have contracts. We're not freelancers. And they didn't make any distinction in the article. And but James Vasquez, troubled soldier. My job, give a troubled soldier support. And what I didn't appreciate was that he had actually served in Ukraine. So had Ben Lackey, even though they had lied about their past military service to get into the armed forces of Ukraine. So they denigrate, and worse, I spoke to the journalist and I said, I just lost my platoon leader, Polish Special Forces officer, a wonderful guy, a very hard commander when you're in the field. And I was devastated when the article came out. And I said, this man is getting the hero of Ukraine, but you couldn't come up with anything to write about except this high school chatter that you wrote in here about, I called someone fat on Twitter. Have they ever seen my Twitter feed? I call people idiots and morons all the time because I'm the equivalent of a senior sergeant, and senior sergeants recalibrate the stupid, and there's plenty of stupid out there. But this was such a nattering little article that I felt insulted by it, insulted and dirtied. And then I saw that they used the term stolen valor. And the right wing started putting out Malcolm Nance accused of stolen valor by New York Times. It's just absolutely disgusting. I'll be taking action on this. I'm sure I can get the New York Times to see ration. But then they go out, and I made an official report while a member of the Ukrainian Armed Forces that I saw a national security threat to Ukraine. It was imminent. It was grave. And it was a person who was completely and utterly compromised in their past. And their past was they were a wanted international con artist, one of the most well-known in Australia, who had conned a TV show live pretending to be an Apple cybersecurity expert, multi-million-dollar person committed wire fraud by creating fake bank statements to pay for a $4.2 million house, and then fled to Portugal and then Ukraine. And this journalist says, no evidence that she's a threat. Well, you're not a counterintelligence officer. You're not an intelligence professional. He didn't even bother to go to the hundreds of intelligence professionals in London and Washington, D.C. and scrub the story. He just said, I don't see what you're talking about. Well, that's because you are not me. You are not a professional. You are a journalist, and obviously not a very good one.
Well, social media has changed a lot. It's allowed, back when I first started in talk radio, which was 93, before the internet, before really cable TV, when people called us on the air in order to protect the station, and they claimed to be a congressman or they claimed to be somebody else, I just couldn't put them on the air because I had to, I'd say, give me a number, I can call you back, that kind of thing. It seems that journalism, or what passes as journalism today, is more like, we'll just put it out there and we'll claim that the platform is responsible instead of the writers or the editors or the actual, the publishers. That's what's bothered me. That's what bothered me about this particular article. The word stolen valor means a lot to me as well, because I remember the movie Wedding Crashers, where they made a joke out of it. They said they get drinks by wearing Purple Hearts. I don't know if you remember that. And I remember that bothered me tremendously. And I saw Vince Vaughn once, and I actually went up to him and I said something to him about it. And he goes, yeah. Like he knows that they screwed up. They didn't realize it at the time. The studio sure as hell didn't understand the importance it's meant to veterans and to those serving, But I just think that, again, people watch baseball games or football games, and they mock athletes, for their performance. And I'm always like, this is number one, it's entertainment, but these guys are playing hard. They really do care. Adam Jones is a friend of mine, and he was an ambassador for Major League Baseball, and talking about the World Baseball Classic. And he goes, look at these nations like Japan, and how 97% of the country was watching those games. They are passionate about who they are as a nation and as a people. They don't hate us because we're different. And I don't think Americans in general do that, except now I'm seeing that it's starting to happen again in the Republican Party. It's McCarthyism again. And I worry tremendously about thinking that if we leave Putin alone, that this will be fine. I don't know where Putin would go if we weren't over there now. Probably not as far. I think, as you said, the Ukrainian people are a strong and resilient lot, but they do need help against, a first world military power. Yeah.
Well, the Russians are at 170,000 dead. That's almost every man that invaded the country. They invaded
it's three
Ukraine.
Times the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Well, they invaded Ukraine with 175,000 men. Their army, as it invaded on the 24th of February last year, no longer exists. You would be hard challenged to find an original vehicle that actually took part in the invasion. And let me tell you something, went through dozens of Russian vehicles. And I mean, when these things go, they don't, they're not, it's like World War II, where you just strafe them, put some bullet holes in and knock out the radiator. These things skyrocket. And they run through minefields, and their men are slaughtered. I've seen, they don't recover the batteries from the battlefield. They live like pigs. This is not a professional army. This is an army of what we call orcs from Lord of the Rings. They are orcs. They are soulless. They are humanless. They are there to loot. They said it. There was a study showing that 90% of the Russian soldiers said that they were there for financial advancement, not for loyalty to the nation. And they do it. We find all sorts of stupid stuff in their pockets. iPhones, rings, everything. Washing machines, them stealing washing machines. That is not a metaphor. Every one of them tried to steal a washing machine, because in Russia, they still use the Soviet, collective steam laundry. And having a washing machine is a sign of wealth when you're living way out in some small rural village in Tashkent.
Sometime I'd like to talk to you at length about how we could fix Russia. And the same way I think we need to help Mexico, Mexico could be an ally, could be a great country we trade with. And instead we use every kind of invective and throw it at them, like Trump and others, as being murderers and rapists and drug dealers, when, the vast majority of people there. as is in Russia too. I mean, I know I grew up in DC, and I knew 1,000 Russians at the beach, Eastern Shore of every beach. Everybody who goes to those beaches knows you see these Russian kids that come over, or at least they used to come over and work. You know, they'd work the summer there, and you get to see them and talk to them, and they, you know, everybody wants to know about America. But not everybody wants to know about the America that you wrote about right here. They want to kill Americans. And I want to talk briefly about this before I let you go here. Everything you've said in that book is unfortunately becoming truer and truer every day. And to have Donald Trump in Waco on the anniversary of the Branch Davidian episode, to have him have a screen behind him showing the January 6th crowd attacking the Capitol and them singing songs to it. It reminds me of the book I read by Eric Larson about Nazi Germany in the final stages before Hitler took full power. They came out of the Treaty of Versailles as a country that was beaten down. But we don't have that excuse. I mean, we live like kings in this freaking country, and people turn to these people for power.
You know, it reminds me of a comment for those of you who are Star Wars fans. Reminds me of a comment from one of the first Star Wars movies, the modern ones, where Queen Amidala says to the Imperial Senate, "This is how democracy dies, to thunderous applause." They use democracy to vote out democracy. We've become so passive about what it means to love this country and to love the foundings of the country. We only see the baby things, the we the people, 1776. That's what they were shouting when they took over the Capitol and brought the Confederate flag in. It was a display of the worst, most gross ignorance of Americanism that you could ever see. True patriotism means upholding those things. People say, well, why did you come back from Ukraine so early? The war's not finished. Well, yeah, we beat them senseless for a while, but I came back to help the Western wall of democracy. Get people to understand that democracy is not something you can just play with and leave alone out there. Benjamin Franklin put it perfectly: a republic, if you can keep it. But now I have idiots on the right saying we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Well, you're too stupid to read the definition. A republic is a democracy in which the rights of the minority are protected.
Right.
Oh, okay. So, but you know what? Then they'll go to their deathbeds denying that that's true.
The truth is, Malcolm,
your education in your words.
Democracy in its form is mob rule without a republic built in, right? In other words, there's no protection for the minorities, as you just say. Again, the book is fantastic, and people, they got to get out and get it. And you have another one. You're working on another one, right?
Well, my memoir is coming out next year, but
that's the one is that the one we're talking about, the movie, possibly?
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
It's going to
That'd
be
be cool.
movie.
I look at it like this, Malcolm, that when you see that picture in Tiananmen Square, do you side with the kid or the tank?
That's a good question. That's a great question. And I think a lot of people would side with the tank.
Unfortunately, I agree
on
with
the right. What I say is I like to give them a taste of their own medicine. When I was doing interviews for that book, I would say, well, this is how the communists did it. They took over power. They ruled. They didn't govern. They did culture wars. They went after this, and I'd say, man, those communists were awful. And they were like, yeah, screw the commies. And I'd say, that's exactly what you're doing right now. You don't even believe in the United States anymore. And they'd say, yeah, I believe in the United States. I'm a real patriot. It's like, really? So why do you want to get rid of, people are talking sedition. People are talking secession. Donald Trump played those videos at that rally to show that he approved of human action to overthrow American Republic. And if you are a defender, especially I'm speaking to you people who were in the armed forces of the United States, you swore an oath on your name, on your life, that you would never allow the United States Constitution to be superseded or overthrown. In that book, I describe the Republican agenda as a constitutional autocracy in which they created dictatorship and the trappings of the Constitution are laid over it. But the rights of the Constitution are for only those people who are members of that party.
Well, I mean, there's no way that John Jay and Madison and Hamilton and those could have ever anticipated this. I mean, they didn't even see that a two-party, they were such patriots and trying to do something that really I guess really other than maybe Rome, but not even Rome. I mean, we are unique in world history. But, you know, their love for it blinded them to what could possibly happen someday, that we could have people like Donald Trump but Trump is the tumor, the cancer is deeper, and it runs through a lot of different areas.
Well, I can explain why. It's that the movie Idiocracy is now a documentary. Okay. The stupiding of America has so accelerated that the people who are these guys, they have devolved away from democracy and American republicanism to pure tribalism. And Donald Trump is their tribal chief. And they don't care that he looks like Jabba the Hutt. They don't care that he's a liar. They don't care that he's a thief. They care that he does what they want, which is to, Trumpism and is very simply defined as this, right? The disgust, hatred, and elimination of common decency.
That's what I always thought woke is. Woke is just being decent to people who, for whatever reason, are just outside the lines, and that's how they live their life. And I mean, I was raised by a single mom in a small apartment. I never knew we didn't have any money because it was always, you keep this up, that kind of, and I look today at and it's not just young people, it's people my age too, that maybe harbored this resentment towards others who accomplished things through, either hard work and in some cases, some cases just helps to be lucky. But there's also when you're lucky, like we are, the 350 million people in a world of 7.5 billion, we won the lottery to be born here. Absolutely. And there's people that just don't get that, So, and I don't know. Hey, you come out to California, you got to come see me, okay? Come on down.
Absolutely.
All right. It's going to stop raining here, I understand, real soon too. So, nobody wants to hear us bitch about the weather because it's so perfect here all the time. Always good to see you, my friend. Please stay well, and I look forward to talking to you again soon, okay?
All right. Take care. We'll see you.
One and only Malcolm Nance. Again, They Want to Kill Americans. Check it out. St. Martin's Press. It's everywhere. Get it on Amazon. I guarantee you'll love the read. Be well, okay?
Bye-bye.
See you, bud. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. I really do appreciate it. You can, I'm going to take some highlights of this and put it on Twitter and YouTube. Please subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube right now, because this is live on YouTube, but later on it'll be in different places. Thank you again so much for being here. And you can always email me at chip@chipfranklin.com. And I'll put you on a mailing list and keep track of me on Twitter at Chip Franklin. And we'll give you an idea. Again, on Thursday at 2:00, we have former director of the FBI, assistant director of the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, and we'll talk a little bit about what the FBI faces today. But till then, I'm Chip Franklin. Be well.
I can handle things. I'm a spy.
We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?